I'm interested in understanding the present and making sense of the present by digging into the past and not to become an historian. I'm not into writing history, but I'm maybe more into rewriting history. My name is Vincent Meessen. I'm a visual artist. I'm based in Brussels, Belgium. And I work with different kind of media. I'm doing some films, some installations. I don't use the word installations, but it's maybe easier to make understand, let's say, the kind of composition, I would say, or assemblage that I do. So some works are connected with sound, some works are connected with design, typeface, for example. Some works are connected with photography. So it's really not an issue of media, I would say. It's really an issue of working on material that have a certain power, I would say, or a certain possibility of agency, and that are mostly coming from the past, and I try to understand what kind of power they could have in the present somehow. So a lot of the work is connected also with colonial issues.
Allô?
Oui, bonjour.
Bonjour Raoul.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Oui.
C'est Mbelolo Yampiko qui t'appelle depuis Kinshasa.
Oh, salut Mbelolo.
Salut,
Ah,
salut.
non, ça me fait plaisir de t'entendre. C'est une bonne surprise. Très content de t'entendre.
Mais moi aussi, moi aussi.
Donc, je t'entends très mal,
One, Two, Three was shot in 2015 as a work that was made for the Venice Biennale, for the Belgian pavilion, when I represented Belgium. And I decided to invite some other people, some other artists, 10 or 11 artists coming from 4 different continents. And because I was very interested by the fact that the Belgian pavilion, who was in the Jardin in Venice, was the first international pavilion that was actually built there by or under, let's say, under the guidance of Leopold II, who was the Belgian king, also the owner, the private owner of Congo at that time. And at that time, it's also fascinating to see how the Venice Biennale is actually very connected to what we call world fairs, but what were also back then some kind of colonial exhibition. Venice was also the city where the last Situationist International Congress took place in 1969.
C'était une chanson très situationniste à l'époque. Hein?
So it's a very important movement because they try to kind of inherit also the surrealist, I would say, more political dimension of the group, even revolutionary dimension of the surrealist, who happened to be at some point also a place where communists were part of the group and militants and so on.
Très bien. Je pense que tu survivras encore longtemps hein, dans la mémoire des Congolais. Ça, c'est la section congolaise de l'international situationniste. Mais oui, vous êtes déjà mort là-bas. Nous continuons. Oui.
My interest goes in different direction because by looking at it, I understand that modernity in Congo is not so much a matter of visual art. For example, there were, of course, a few visual artists in Congo, mostly trained by, you know, Colonial academy and so on. It doesn't mean that it's not interesting, but modernity in Congo, artistically, is really a matter of rumba and of music, and this is so gigantic that it's so gigantic that you cannot even imagine how big it was and how far it went, also because it expanded in whole Africa. And so my work was actually starting from the Situationist, but then connecting with traditional music in Congo, with the whole birth of rumba and what rumba is the produce of. And it's of course it's very connected with colonization, but also with slavery, because one needs to understand that rumba is for a lot of people coming from Cuba, but Cuba was of course a place where slavery took place, and where a lot of Bantu people from Congo were actually traded, sold as slaves, but they kept on playing music, and when the record was invented and when it came back to Congo, the Congolese immediately, of course, they recognized their beats, their sounds, and then they kind of took it immediately and started to reproduce it, and then to invent and starting from there to create this Congolese rumba, which is very specific.
Dans un premier temps, j'étais un peu intrigué, mais pourquoi parlait-il de ce qu'on pourrait appeler des révolutions manquées ou des théories inachevées? Alors j'ai compris qu'ils voulaient aller chaque fois au-delà de ce passé-là dont ils avaient hérité, pour ajouter un plus, mais avec une radicalité plus accrue. J'étais assez critique parce que je venais des milieux protestants dans lesquels la contestation au Congo avait commencé depuis l'époque coloniale, les Kimbangu, les Kimpavit, tout ça c'est une tradition Congo. Et par conséquent, j'avais gardé cela.
Not every work has a personal dimension, but of course there is a personal connection with Africa in my family. But I would say in most of Belgian families, you know, due to colonial period and presence, and that's also the case about Congo in my family. So, of course, I think we have a huge responsibility in the situation. I don't speak about the past, I speak about today, you know. And it's not at all a question of, you know, feeling guilty about it, because I think that the Congolese also carry a part of the responsibility of the situation right now in their country. And I don't speak about the Congolese as a generality, but some politicians at least. And so we are still very, I think, dependent on a lot of things of seeds that have been planted back then. And so I think it's also our responsibility, people from my generation. I wouldn't say like only artists, you know, because again, I think the artist is only one of the agents, one of the player in society. So I don't try to, you know, create a sort of mythified being that would be above and like looking at it with its own, you know, criticality, which is the tool which kind of makes it visible and clear for everybody. So it's really about, you know, going to the front. You have to act, you know, it's not about thinking, it's about, and again, it's, you know, the praxis is this idea that you have to try to figure out what you can do from a certain context and with your tool, and try to create some kind of sensorium. And that's where the artist, I think, is very important, because we are dealing with, you know, images, sounds. We are dealing with sensitivity also, and it's a very important part of the work, of course, is to convey never a message, but a sense of something that has been lived. No, it's an experience.
Je crois qu'il avait une soif réelle de situationner, de vouloir vivre mieux, de sortir de l'ordinaire, ne pas accepter de vivre le quotidien comme un déjà là. Il fallait chaque jour transformer, recréer, réinventer en quelque sorte la vie quotidienne pour y être à l'aise. Dans cet effort-là, je continue à dire que la place de la femme n'était pas suffisamment affirmée. Parce qu'à part Bernstein, à Paris par exemple, intervenait, mais les autres dames laissaient presque le débat aux hommes. Et ça, je trouvais comme une limite, puisque dans la mesure où on cherchait à transformer la société, et que si les femmes ne participaient pas à fond, il y aurait quelque part un problème.
The New World Order jungle book of human self-deception, a human primate's man-bite into austere guns, textiles, indigo Indians, and the Black Scout.
Yeah, Treborine is a recent filmic installation that I did in 2018. The starting point was I had been working on the idea of abstraction, not only as a formal concept, you know, not only the idea of abstraction in the art, but also abstraction, you could say, as a claim of modernity, also as the invention of abstraction, as if it was something the Western world would have invented. And starting from there, I was interested in the fact that in Toulouse, where I was invited, in the city of Toulouse in the south of France, which is a city which is known as the Pink City because they have specific bricks, you know, so they're kind of light brick. But it's a city with a big heritage, and I was wondering where it was coming from, basically also how the city became what it was. And I understood it was linked to, during the Middle Ages, the selling of woad. Woad is the blue pigment. It's a plant, so it's a sort of European indigo, if you want. And they became really rich because they were planting this in this region. But it's also known as a city of troubadours, you know, where the first society of poets was actually constituted in Europe. While I was working in Congo, I was also very interested in trying to work with one of the characters in my film is not only young female playing rumba, but also a rapper, a female rapper, who is quite well known in Congo. And I wanted her to listen to some spoken word, you know. And then I thought, I'm gonna make her listen to that album that I really like. And I wouldn't know who was actually the spoken word on that album, but it happened to be the founder of The Last Poets, which is a very famous band from Harlem, from New York, who was created in '68 also. And so we speak about the period before rap, of course, before hip hop. And this guy called Kane, Julian Kane, was actually happened to be living in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam for decades. So I thought that might be a sort of very interesting way to follow up after 1, 2, 3, to have a work that was still connected with music and with the spirit of '68, and to spoken word as a tradition that was instrumental also into what a lot of our kids are actually listening to without knowing, you know, even the roots from that music. And And Kane is someone who has expressed also a connection with the color blue really early on, as spoken word for him is a sort of tradition of connected, let's say the reinvention of the tradition of blues, if you want. And so I proposed him to collaborate on a project, and I actually commissioned him a poem, a new poem.
I've seen National Geographic World War films of men piled human mountain high upon one another, their blood and guts in acid rain of their bodies raining down upon the...
And I invited him to perform with a drummer from Belgium called Lander Gisling, who is very talented and someone who has been also raised with hip-hop when he was really a kid.
Stalk the desert. A black scout rounding up children he has forgotten they are his own. Man against himself, freedom without reference, in a roundabout. 3 children on a desert trying to find home. Lost habitat of original gold.
The work is actually a combination of them playing together. And my work there is to go in this museum in Toulouse and in the region and connect some objects that are not directly connected to the color blue, but to the idea of exile and navigation and colonial era. And they are brought together into this film. I kind of imagine that the work could be a sort of a meditation on color, on the blue color, or on the color blue, and we see how Kane is actually relating the color to really deeply to lived experience, so not to historical artifacts, which are somehow dead, you know, stored into museum, handled by museum people in the film. I would say excavated sometimes, and put in relation with one another, which is impossible to do in a show, for example. So it's really like the idea how a film could be a sort of narrated exhibition, how the poet can be the one who is not assuming the task of a critique, nor of a guide, but as you know, as a sort of, you would enter a show where a poem is being said, and it recreates a relationship with different kinds of objects who could never be put together in an exhibition. So conceptually, that's the idea. But then we develop some connections with between the objects and between also props, or I would say objects that are belonging to Kane, that are personal objects. Can be the script of his poem, but also like a toy piano, something he performs, or a voodoo doll he performs with on stage. And these objects, like these props, they connect also with some objects stored in museum and create this kind of very strange relationship between, you know, like common objects and objects that have been museified. So the question is also, you know, how we relate to objects and what a museum is. You know, Paul Valéry used to say that the museum is to objects what zoo are to animals, you know. And what it means is that every kind of look is a constructed look.
Jesus was on his way to wake people up and beckoned a reluctant follower. The reluctant one said, "I'd like to go with you, Jesus, but I've got to go bury my brother." Jesus said, "Let the dead bury the dead."
How can we use art as a practice in order to raise questions, you know, not answer them as such, as a sort of that we're going to be conclusive about it. But so how we deal also with the heritage of criticality within the art field is, I think, is a very important question today that is avoided by a lot of people that are actually more dealing with object and still with matter, you know, with objecthood in the end and with objectality. And there are some other practices that are much more, you know, I think trying to grasp something from what we can inherit from other kinds of traditions. And these traditions, they are coming from South America, they are coming from Africa, they are coming from India. And that's why I think we are, as Westerners, obliged to not only to read, you know, these, because a lot of these thinking are not existing in terms of, you know, written in writings, but they are, for some of them, transmitted orally, for some of them, practice that needs to be, you know, lived or experienced. And so it means that as an artist, I think today that's why it's fascinating for me to, you know, to work, or when I worked in Burkina Faso in the early 2000s, it was like nothing of my grit, nothing of my reading of the word was fitting with what I was living. I mean, everything that I had learned was kind of deceived and became inoperative in some way. So you can maintain and say, okay, I'm the one who knows everything and I'm the good, you know, white guy who can make sense of everything, or you just can recognize the facts. I mean, the reality of this thing is that there are some other ways to deal with reality, and they can be very interesting, and they are demanding, and they are sometimes a whole cosmogony that challenge a lot of the things you've been believing into. And so I think that's what interests me the most in dealing with, let's say, in working in Africa for the last 10 years is being surprised all the time, learning a lot from very different people. Yeah, I think it opens new paths and new ways of thinking about the world.
Crying all alone, calling for you, baby. Come on. Ooh, 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 ooh. Lost and searching for my baby. Baby. Lord knows my baby ain't around.